All right. Now today there's one command thought that I need to grip you with. It's a command that basically nobody obeys. It is hard to obey. That makes it why most people won't follow it. And I'm more concerned about most Christians won't follow it. This is where we'll want to wrestle with it a little bit. I want to make sure I help you understand the idea behind it. The concept is go the second mile, which right now may not make sense to you, but as we go through the scripture, I'll help you understand. Now remember, the reward for us obeying this command like any others of the Lord is simple. He that has my commandments and keeps them, he is the person that God loves. You want God to love you, that means he wants you to become, he's able to make you the person who he can love. And he that loves me shall be loved by my Father, is what Jesus said. Today's is go the second mile and turn the other cheek. Matthew 5:38 through 42. Now, when somebody insults you, do you turn the other cheek and let them insult you again, or do you strike back and don't let them disrespect you? If somebody slaps you, you slap back. If somebody hits you, do you hit back? Well, we do that from the time we're kids, don't we? That was my toy and they're not going to get it. Thump! And there goes the fights with the little ones. We have the wrong action from the time we're little. And so we have to really see how much this goes against the grain of who you are as the past, though. And God gives us and makes it able for us to follow this. Read with me in the scripture here, Matthew 5:38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. This whole section deals with the concept of going the second mile. There's a number of examples listed here to show you what that means, and the Lord will make it clear to us as we look at it. Remember, the first idea he says is where we underlined it. Do not resist the evil person. We always resist the evil person. We don't deserve what they're giving us, and so we resist, oppose, and fight back. Jesus is giving us a command that's contrary to the very evil nature of our hearts. He says, first of all, do not resist an evil person. Then he says, turn the other cheek to him when he does it. Slap you this side, give him the other. Let him hit you again. Get twice as hit from that evil person, is what he's saying. Then under the next in verse 40, let him have your cloak also, which we'll explain what that means in a moment. And also, whenever you're compelled to go a mile, go with him 2. Do twice as much as you're required to do, is what he's saying. Now this will change your life forever, and it makes a difference whether it's in business and school and with your home and relationships, no matter what. If you do these things, it will revolutionize your life. And also the last one, it says, when somebody asks you for something, don't turn away from them. Help them the best you can. All right, now let's get into what he's talking about. So first of all, it makes sense to us. I mean, I don't have any cloaks. Anybody have any cloaks? I don't have a cloak. You might have one, but I don't have one. So what's he talking about, all these kind of things? Well, first of all, let's go to the idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That idea has been misused. Even in Jesus' day, the people twisted the Bible from what it was intended. Let me make sure you understand what it says. Back in the old laws of Israel, when God established the law, he set up a justice system, a court system, just like we have in America. We go to court if we get in trouble. And if we are wrong, we get punished for what we've done. We go to jail or pay fines or whatever it is. That's exactly only what this is talking about. God's justice in Israel for assault and battery was equal payment for the crime committed by the assailant. If a man came along and attacked a pregnant woman who was defenseless and was attacked and hurt, if he broke her jaw, if he blinded her, or if he killed her, it was the court system was required by God to give equal justice. They would literally If that guy made that woman blind from the assault, they would blind him in one eye. They made it so they would fear the court. If they killed that lady, that innocent lady and the baby because of pregnancy, that guy would have capital punishment. In our culture, everybody's arguing about capital punishment. God established capital punishment. They must have a law of justice that's equal to the crime. That's what it's about. In other words, if you steal a piece of bread, you don't go get your life taken. That's not equal crime. His idea of equal crime is tooth for a tooth, eye for an eye, life for life. So whenever a government gets extreme and starts putting people to death because they steal a loaf of bread, they're not just, according to God's judgment. You hear what I'm saying? That's all this is talking about. The eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life has to do with justice by God's standard in a culture so that laws of order or protection for people are there. So girls don't have to be afraid of being assaulted or raped or whatever. They're protected because they have such a strong law upon them that men don't get away with their evil. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now, with that in mind, the same ideas in the court system. If somebody sued a person with a false accusation, the penalty was the same as the suit demanded. Can you imagine in our culture if all these people see dollar signs in their eyes? They think, if I go over to Walmart and fall down, I can sue them for $1 million because I hurt my leg. And it's a false suit. What they should do, when they catch them, they should be fined $1 million and taken everything from them till they're broke and go to whatever it takes. They should be sued for what they've done because that would stop these false accusers of doing things. Also, in the same light, it says, now think about it, when some people go to jail because they never did anything wrong, they were falsely accused by someone. I've heard of endless stories like that, right? You hear people, it's unjust. What this says, if a person testifies and is a liar, and they're testifying in a case for a person who they're claiming that person was a murderer and they catch them, they are executed. They are given their life because they were trying to take that person's life falsely. That's how strong this justice was. Now, think about that if we had that today. How many people would go up in front of court and lie? It would scare them to death to be liars, wouldn't it? And that's the point of why it's just. Our system is so soft today in many ways that people get away with all kinds of crimes. They lie, they sell out somebody, they make deals with to do this and don't have to go to jail and so they sit there and lie through their teeth and they put people in prison or worse who shouldn't be there. And they get away with it day after day. And it makes it sound like our system is unjust. The concept is not. But if we don't follow through in God's form of justice, if we would force those people that were liars in the court and got the same punishment, we would really slow down a lot of garbage in our system, wouldn't we? We just don't follow the rules that God set up. But this is why He set these up and why it's called life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so forth. It's equal justice is what He is always after. Now, by Jesus' day, the people turned this law of justice into personal retaliation. Instead of following the law, they said, this person hit me, I'm going to hit him back. And you know what? In the Middle East, this still goes on today. If you go into the Islamic tribes, those tribal people do the same thing that was done back thousands of years. Instead of letting the courts take care of it, if somebody bumps off one of their people, the tribe goes in there and bumps off one of theirs. And they spend their time, you hear it in the news still, the Islamic people are killing each other constantly, fighting each other, murdering each other, following this principle. You don't get away with it. In fact, if you listen to bin Laden, you know what he says? Reason he's doing what he's doing because he's getting back at the West for the Crusades. He doesn't, and he really believes it. He keeps following, he never lets it drop. He doesn't let authority take care of it. He's going to get back at something that he never was a part of. Crusades? You know, I mean, it has nothing to do with, America didn't even exist when the Crusades went, but he fights America instead of, because we have bloodline. Some of us are from Europe and so place. But it's endless, this whole thing of retaliation is what they live and die for, even today in many of the Middle Eastern cultures. It's wrong. It's not what God ever intended with this whole idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It had to do with judicial systems, not personal attacks. And what do they call that today? When you do not wait for the law to do it, but you do it yourself. What are you? Vigilante. Exactly. That's a vigilante. It's a false concept. That's not what God had in mind, never did. Now, here's the Greek idea behind the word resist. It basically means to stand against or oppose. And he said, don't oppose the evil person. He said, don't oppose that evil person. Don't stand against him. Don't get back at him. He tells them the opposite of what they practiced in that day. The same word is when they tell you to not be opposed to civil government in Romans chapter 12. God says, do not resist government. Here's where it's worded, Romans 13:2. Therefore, whoever resists the government opposes what God has established. Those who resist will bring punishment on themselves. That same word there, resist, is the same one he tells you not to resist when he says don't resist an evil person, who is basically evil against you, is what the whole thing is. Now, to stand against or oppose, and God commands us to resist the devil, though. The same word he tells you to resist the devil, that he tells you not to resist an evil person, nor resist government, but he tells you to resist the devil. The same Greek word again. God commands you to resist the devil. And here's a couple examples. James 4:7. Resist the devil, he will flee from you, is what he's saying. Also, Peter says, resist him, talking about the devil, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world. When you are suffering under persecution or hatred by people who don't like Jesus and hate you because you're a Christian or because you do what's right, they won't talk to you, they won't call you on the phone because you're doing what God tells you to do. He says, resist the devil. Don't resist those people. Resist the devil. God will bring justice in its time. And it doesn't mean you have to wait till heaven. This is where people make a mistake. Now, he says, I tell you not to resist the evil person. Remember, legal justice was given to the government to determine proper punishment for crimes against people. The government's job is to take care of this situation. People in that day and up to this day twisted it to retaliate against those they thought were evil, skipping the court system. And here's the danger. Parents teach their children this all the time. Here's what they say. Don't tattle. Take care of it yourself. Have you ever heard that or said that? What you're doing is teaching them to be vigilantes. You're telling them to skip the sit. Why? Who is the authority? You are as a parent. They are supposed to, isn't God tell you you're not to go out there and shoot your neighbor because they hurt your child with a drive-by shooting, right? You call the cops. And the cops, the government, are to take care of the situation. You are told to go to the government to take care of it. And then you turn around and tell your children, you be a vigilante and beat them up if they fight you. Instead of don't tattle, don't go tell the teacher, you take care of it. That's wrong. You're teaching your children the opposite of what God has ordered you to do. The authorities are supposed to take care of it. The teacher is not to sit there and let kids be bullies and beat up other kids in school. They're not to sit there and let things go on. They're to take authority and protect. Their job is to provide and protect for those students. Just like a parent's job is to provide and protect their children, right? And it's their duty. You have to not tell them it's a tattling thing. You must take charge. You become the judge and the jury. You're the court for the kids. And so the same thing as they grow up, if they learn it from you that they go to authority and don't fight and beat people up, but they allow authority to take care of it, when they grow up, they'll be used to letting the police officers and the government take care of also civil issues, right? Rather than fighting their neighbors and attacking them and throwing rocks at their windows or whatever else they do to get back at them. You got to see that this is a principle of Scripture. Now, if we don't resist, then you'll say, well, then how are they ever going to be punished? Do I have to wait for God to judge them and so forth and at judgment day in heaven or hell or whatever? No. Jesus is not saying you have to sit around and be a doormat. Understand what I'm saying? He's not saying you have to sit around and let people just beat the daylights out of you. He says real simple, Romans 12:19, Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. Notice the word give place and don't resist. You don't resist, you don't oppose it yourself. You give in to the wrath because it says, God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Now, when does God take vengeance and when will he repay? At judgment day? No! Don't misunderstand what he's teaching you here. Vengeance is mine, I will repay happens pretty quick. Romans 13:4 explains this really simple. The government is God's servant working for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid. The government has the right to carry out the death sentence. Notice who takes vengeance. The government is God's hand. He doesn't make you wait and just go ahead and get suffer out of these people do evil against you. The government steps in and they have the right by God to even kill them. They're the ones that are given authority to even give capital punishment if necessary to stop those evil people, not you. It says it's God's servant, an avenger to execute God's anger. Remember what it said? Vengeance is mine. Who's the avenger? It says here, God says the servant, the government is the avenger to execute God's anger on anyone who does what is wrong. The government will step in. Is it perfect? No. Where they make mistakes, that's where God will finish it at Judgment Day. What slips through their fingers, because we don't know everything. God saw every event. He sees everything people do and say. He knows exactly what's going on. You go to a court system, you get some fancy lawyer who's a good talker and can fake people out. He may be able to twist justice, and you think, hey, that guy got away with murder, or that guy got away with evil. No, he didn't. If that happens, God will bring the final justice. But you have to trust God that He is doing what's righteous, even when you can't see it yet. Does that make sense? This is what Jesus is teaching. God has handed this part over to the government, not to you and me personally. This is not our job. We are not allowed to do it. Well, if the government avenges, what is my personal duty then? Here's what he goes on to explain what my duty is personally. He says, therefore, if your enemy is hungry, do what? Feed him. I want to slap the guy, and Jesus says to feed the guy. You hear what I'm saying? He says if he's thirsty, give him a drink. I want him to dry up and go away. I don't want to give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Really? What kind of fire do you put on his head? Look at verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Two wrongs don't make a right. Good old saying comes right here. Two wrongs don't make a right. You're not justified to do evil because this person did evil. You're to blow his mind by showing him God's love. As hard as that is, it's not impossible, because we just sang a song that said, He's able to make us do what's right. And see, it's not natural, but it is God's way to do things. What will happen if you overcome evil with good? Because no one else will do it but a crazy Christian. No one else is going to do this but a crazy Christian. It will be a glorifying event to God. Let me give you an example here. One of the first things God says not to resist evil is the slap in the face. You know? Now, understand, if you get in somebody's face and you curse him, disrespect him, and you get slapped, is that what he's talking about here? No, you deserve a slap then. You know, you mouth off to a woman, bam, and then she slaps you. It's your fault. You deserved it. There's a difference between how you treat a lady, right? So we're not talking about that. If you get slapped because you deserve it, then you're lucky you just got a slap and not worse, you know? But that's not what he's talking about when he says, do not resist the slap. Here's what he's talking about. Here's an example from the Old Testament. Micaiah was a mighty, mighty man of God. He was alone, while all the other preachers were sellouts who, for political gain and money, wouldn't tell the truth about the Bible, but made the president, or in this case the king, tell him anything he wanted to hear. They were all yes men. Micaiah loved God. And that king of that day was evil. He disobeyed God. And so he was the only one. So he got dragged before the king. And here's what this little statement says. Now Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah went near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, which way did the Spirit from the Lord go for me to speak to you? Now the reason they did that was because all the other ones kept saying, King, you're a great guy. God loves you, everybody's going to heaven, blah, 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 everything's wonderful. Micaiah said, no, God doesn't honor you. You disobey him, you will be brought to judgment. You need to stop what you're doing. They didn't like what he said, so they slapped him in the mouth because they were basically disrespecting him because he dared to not give the party line that everybody else was giving. He dared to stand up and say, this book doesn't say that. It says something different. He stood against the flow of culture and the preachers of the day even. Now, we have another story in the book of Acts in the New Testament with the famous Apostle Paul. Now, this is a case where, let me read it to you and we'll see how it works here. Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. Now, what happened is Paul got dragged before the religious leaders. Remember, in that day in Israel, they were as powerful as politicians. They were mostly merged with the government. Religion and civil government are kind of all together. It's all kind of one mesh. So he's coming up before, it's like coming up before the mayor or the governor of the state kind of thing, but religious connection. And he proclaims, and he's getting dragged there with false pretenses. So he was already accused falsely of doing something wrong, and he didn't. So he says to his defense, I've lived in good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to smack him in the face, strike him in the face. Now they smacked him in the face because he didn't want to hear him say that he was obedient to God and had lived in good conscience before God. And he wasn't doing evil. They didn't like that, so they smacked him. Now, Paul said to the guy who smacked him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. What's he saying to him? That was not exactly a friendly response. He said, I'm innocent. For you to smack me like that, I'm not going to hit you back. God will strike you for that because you're doing evil, is what he outright told him. For you set to judge me according to the law, and you do command me to be struck contrary to the law. They disobeyed the law by physically hitting him. Here they're supposed to be the law people, and they were hypocrites. They didn't follow the law. They were evil because they contradicted the very law they claimed that they were standing up for. So they were evil people. And remember, Jesus said, don't resist the evil people. So here's what happens next. Those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? In other words, Ananias, the high priest, ordered that to happen. Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. He didn't know who Ananias was by looking at him. He never saw him before, so he didn't recognize him. And he said here, two wrongs don't make a right. He said, okay, I apologize, for it's written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. That man did not have to earn Paul's respect. Because he was an authority, he had to respect the authority. That tells us how God wants us to respond to authority today. Whether it's the President of the United States, whether it's senators and whatever, even if we see some of them doing evil, we are told to respect the place because God put them in position. Even though they're wrong. Now, it doesn't mean we have to agree with them. It doesn't mean we have to vote for them. But it means that we have to respect them as they're an authority. If they're the president, we say, yes, President. Yes, sir. You treat them with respect. You submit to their authority. Trusting God what? That he'll bring vengeance at his time, even if we don't have the power to make a difference on that. You see what I'm saying? Even if you see something wrong. And this is important. Paul said, I will not do wrong by doing this. I've been already ordered by God never to speak disrespectful to authorities, so I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were the authority. And he took it back. Even though they were still evil, even though they still broke the law, he still turned and respected them in spite of their evil. Hear what I'm saying? And this is how it's so important for us to take action in our own days. Number 2, he said, do not resist evil, which means do not resist a lawsuit, which was another example. And here's the example. He talked about when somebody, verse 40, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. This is the idea of a lawsuit against somebody who has a rightful claim against you. In other words, you've got something wrong. You built your building on their property and you weren't allowed to. And they're going to sue you because you did it or whatever. There's lots of legal lawsuits that go because people won't back down from what they've done that's wrong. He says, first of all, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. in other words, do twice as much as the law demands. People in bitterness do what the law forces them to. Jesus says, not only do what the law tells you to, don't do it in bitterness. Go twice as far and do what I want you to do. Show that person love in spite of what they are. Even though they don't deserve it, you show them love anyway. What's that mean? Well, first of all, a cloak was a poor man's possession. It was about all they had. And what a cloak was basically a combo. It was their coat, blankie, and what they could keep themselves with because they didn't own a home. Remember, back then they didn't have cars, air conditioning, video games, cell phones. They didn't have any of this stuff. Nothing was there. Basically, what you did was you walked. Very few people were rich enough to have horses. Some could get a hold of a donkey or something, but basically, most people walked. They had to walk everywhere. They didn't own anything hardly. They were lucky they had food, and a lot of them didn't even own a home. So a cloak was valuable, and it was the only thing that kept them alive in the cold nights to keep them warm. What he's saying here is this. In fact, let me give you from the law so you see how important this is. God even had laws about this. It says, if you lend money to my people, to any poor person among you, never act like a banker. A money lender is nothing more than a banker. He said, don't even act like a banker. So that tells you what they think about bankers who pull all your, just think how they sell houses today. They scourge you full of money. By the time you pay for your house, they've ripped you off for more than the house cost. That is really a ripoff. God doesn't like this whole kind of thing. But he says, if you lend money to my people, to any poor person among you, never act like a banker. Charge no interest. Whoa! Now, a banker makes a living by interest, so there's nothing wrong with charging interest, but there's a difference between interest and, really interest, ripping you off, kind of thing, really taking you to the cleaners. And believe me, every time you let your credit card go over, think about it. This is what he's talking about. Those credit card interest rates are what he's talking about. They're rip-offs, and you got to be careful. They kiss you to the face when they give you the card, and then they just drain you dry with interest. God says that's what destroys poor people. He hates that. Be aware of that kind of thing. He says, if you take any of your neighbor's clothes as collateral, give it back to him by sunset. And that Hebrew idea is the cloak. If you take a cloak as collateral, do you understand? It's like people today, they'll put up their house for collateral. Well, their cloak was their house. This is how a poor person, the cloak was as valuable as today's houses. So if they gave up their cloak to try to get a loan, it would be the same as being out tomorrow outside sleeping here with the bugs and the snakes at night because you have no house to go to. You're homeless, because that's how important this was. He said, if you take that neighbor's house as a collateral, you let them come back at night and come back in and stay. Then they can leave during the daytime, but at night they get to come back and sleep in the house. That's basically what it is. You treat a poor person with respect. You don't take everything they have. That's what he's saying. And he says, don't even act like these bankers. In verse 27, it may be the only clothes he has to cover his body. What else will he sleep in? When he cries out to me, I will listen because I am compassionate. If he cries out and says, you're unjust, you're an evil person, what did he say? Vengeance is mine, I'll repay. If he hears poor people crying out because of bankers or you who are harsh upon those who have need, he will make you pay for it. Believe me, you'll pay. God will bring justice upon people like that. Now, number 3, do not resist civil regulation. Now, here's the other thing where it said, if you're compelled to go a mile, go another. Here's what it is, real simple. The Roman legions went into Israel before Jesus was born and took over. They controlled Israel. What that meant was mean old nasty Roman soldiers were marching around Israel everywhere you went. Everywhere you turned, there was, and because again, they didn't have a lot of horses. They had horses, but not all of them. So basically, they were marching around with big old packs of military gear and their food and whatever clothing they had. They're hauling these big bags, and they're marching all through Israel over, bumping into people, because they were hard iron fist conquerors who didn't like the Jews. They hated them. Those stupid Jews, every time they turned around, they tried to get freedom. They loved freedom. They tried to rebel. So they hated being there. They hated the weather. They hated the people. And they acted that way. They were nasty, unwanted people. Now, these Roman soldiers, marching around everywhere, had control over everybody. In fact, they had passed a law that demanded a Hebrew boy, even boys, had to carry a Roman soldier's heavy pack for 1 mile whenever he demanded it. In other words, you could be raking your yard and the soldier come by and say, "You idiot, get over here! Boom, here's my pack. Now you march now, I'm going this way. You're going to follow me for 1 mile." They had to stop what they're doing, if they're eating lunch, going to school, whatever they're doing, and they had to pick up that big pack, and they were required by law to march next to that soldier for 1 mile. Period. They were a donkey, basically, is what they were. They were pure slaves. And they had no way to say no. That's the law. Now, here's what Jesus is saying, though, that's so powerful. The first mile was their servant obligation because we're told to obey the law, right? Now, can you imagine out in the hot sun hauling that thing and you hate the guy anyway, he's mean and nasty, and you don't want him in your neighborhood anyway, and here he is. And when you get done with that mile, your obligation's finished, you can throw it down the dirt, and you can go back home finally and say, "I hate you." That's what you can do, and that's what many of them did. But here's Jesus. He said, no, wait a minute. The second mile is your badge of discipleship. You become the master. Instead, at the end of the mile, you look at that guy in the face, as nasty as he is, and you say, "You know what, sir? I fulfilled my obligation. Now I'm going to carry it 1 more mile because I want to. Let's go." And that's what Jesus ordered his Christians to do. You hear the difference? Do twice as much as you're ordered to do. Do twice as much as you're expected of. Now, how's that flesh out into our lives? At work. You just do a little bit you have to do to get by? You do. You're following the same ways as all the lazy people of this world. But if you say, "You know what, I'm going to do twice as much as I'm told to do," you get promoted. I guarantee you get promoted. You hear what I'm saying? That's one thing my father did that blew away all the people when he was alive, and when he first moved here, he went down and worked at a condominium. The people there that worked taking care of, he was a maintenance man. It wasn't a big deal. It was just maintenance, servant, go around cleaning stuff up. But he did twice as much as he was told to do. And those people rewarded him for it. Before you knew it, they are wanting to give him raises and raises. He got paid twice as much. He got paid probably more than the supervisor did. Because they saw his value. He was rewarded for what he did. He did the second mile, and it came back to him 100-fold because God blessed him. Think about in high school or school, you guys. Just think if you're told, "Here's your homework, read 5 pages. "I hate homework, I'm only going to read 4 1/4. You can do that, but just think if you read 10. Go back and start the 5 back before, you do twice as much. What will that do for you? Will that punish the teacher? That'll make you so smart that your grades will rise up. You will find, and if you do this all your life, what happens when you get into business? What happens when you get a job? What happens when you do things? Instead of complaining about the boss and whatever, the bosses are noticing you. Your work ethic is what this is all about. You do the second mile, you blow away your teachers, your parents, you blow away your employers, you astound the government of who you are. And do people take notice? You bet they do. And that's exactly why God tells you to do this. You do work twice as hard as anybody else. You do twice as much as you're told to do. You do it because God told you to. Jesus said you will be rewarded for this. You will affect their lives. And is God after you to get rewarded? No, He's after you to affect their lives. The only way you affect their life, think about it. How will you affect your boss's life if every time he tells you to do something, you say, why do you always make me do the rotten jobs? You make me do all the junk. That person always gets away with everything, and you make me do it. I hear this all the time from people. Instead, if you go do the rotten job without even being asked, and they say, "Oh, I want you to go clean the toilets." I already did it. What? Oh, I did that just an hour ago. You can go check. I already cleaned the toilets. You're kidding me. No, I cleaned the toilets already. What's your name again? Okay, I guarantee you it blows the employer away. It does. You know what you do? You win their ear, too. Instead of them seeing you as resistant and always trying to cheat them out of their money, because, a boss or a guy that's got money, he worked hard for his money. He doesn't want to pay a guy who only wants to do half the job, right? But man, he finds a person who's really pouring it out. He sees in him potential. I want this guy to be a supervisor for me when my business grows. I want this guy, I can trust this guy. I want him to, what happens? It's a blessing. And also, he'll listen to you when you tell him about Jesus. You've invested into him. That's what God's after. That's what the second mile's about. Look at what it says, the last one. Do not resist a needy neighbor. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Do not turn away. Now, if they ask you for your car, obviously you can't give them your car because then you don't have a car. There's obviously a limit to what you're saying here. But the point is, give him who asks you. It doesn't say give him everything he asks you. My kids would have had me out in the street if I had gave them all the thing they wanted from me. They wanted everything. I wouldn't be able to pay my bills. Give to him who asks, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Help them even when they never pay it back. Help them in love. In other words, you have to make sure your budget's taken care of first, but when you have some extra, don't be afraid to share it to help that person who's definitely in need. And don't expect it in return. Expect it as a gift. If they happen to give it back, that would be a blessing. But what happens is people get more angry and fight over more things about money and borrowing and lending with family and everything else and anything else. Wait till somebody dies and they have the court guy comes in and reads the will. More people who are supposed to be brothers and sisters become enemies and hate each other for the rest of their lives over money. What a stupid thing. God hates that. What you would do instead is to follow the second mile thing. Let it go. Let it go. It ain't going to hurt you. Oh, it's not fair. Who cares? I got a mansion coming in heaven. I'm on streets of gold. Who cares? I'm passing through anyway right now. I got things to do. I got place to be because I got a long, big, huge mansion coming where I'm going. You can have whatever scratch you want now because you're just going to lose it up there if you keep up what you're doing. But I'm after my real reward that's coming, and you think in that way. Do not grudgingly fulfill what is expected of you, but do twice as much voluntarily. Do it without being forced to do it. The Lord wants to develop in you and demonstrate through you one big thing: genuine, godlike love. And you'll never be able to have people see it until you go the second mile. If you do the first mile, you're forced to. Everybody does that, basically. Even if they do it half-heartedly, most of them will do it because they're forced to. You gain nothing there. That's not the point. Matthew 6:21 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." That's simple. What you think is most valuable is where you'll put your money. If you think it's more important to have a great car, you might be starving, but I've seen guys poor as anything, and they buy these brand. In fact, at one time, we were in church service. A guy knocks on the door, comes up there. He pulls in with a brand new car, and he says, "Can I have some money for gas?" I said, "Dude, your car's worth 3 times what I got. Here's the junker I have. You buy a brand new car and you can't even afford gas? Why'd you do that? Why would you do that?" I said, "I'm sorry, I can't give you my gas money. I can't even hardly go on the road. If I was you, I would have suggested you take that car." He just bought it. Take it back there and get your money back. You can do it in 30 days. That's stupid to buy a brand new car that if you can't afford gas, why are you buying that car? And begging strangers for money. That's incredible to me. But that's what people will do because it was more valuable to him to be somebody, pull up with a big fancy car to show people off, than to live within the means of who he was. That's crazy. You know what I'm saying? You've got to learn that that's not God. Where your treasure is where your heart will be. Well, what's most important to God? Cars or what's the most valuable thing to God? Your heart? And there's a bunch of hearts. People are more important to God than cars. People are more important than houses. People are more important than anything to God. So guess where He'd want you to invest your money into? People. People, yeah, people. God's work, God's kingdom, and people. That's why He says when somebody needs it, help them. Give them some money to help them. Now, if they're going to take the money and go out and buy drugs, don't give them money. That's not helping them, right? See, again, you got to use your head what He's talking about. Sometimes you have to give them a gift certificate to Publix instead of money because they won't, otherwise they misuse it. But the thing is, help them is what He's saying. Help them. Now, the lawsuit, remember, if you gave what you was required was just to give your clothing, and you could leave in resentment. How many times you see on TV those court shows? I get sick of those. They all come stomping out of there. That guy ripped me off. It's not fair. I didn't get what I wanted. Blah blah. And they all hate each other. And they used to be cousins or whatever. Now they hate each other. Whatever. It's crazy. But just think if a guy went up there and he said, "Okay, it's against you. You have to pay $300." And he said, "Okay, judge, thank you, but I'm going to give $6." The judge would say, "Excuse me? No, I'm going to give him $600." First of all, the person who hated him would be astounded. He would, instead of being angry, he'd say, "Why would you do that? The judge is only making you give me $3. I know, but I'm concerned about you. I'm going to invest in your life. I want you to be okay." Wow! What a power and that's exactly what this is all talking about, the second mile. Do twice as much as you're forced to do. What about give the cloak? If you invest in their lives, you have shown them true love. True love. Didn't Jesus give up everything for you and me? He gave up His life for us. He did nothing wrong. He was accused of everything, and He gave it more. And so let's finish with this concept here. Look at Luke 17. Suppose someone has a servant who is plowing fields or watching sheep. Does he tell his servant when he comes from the field, "Have something to eat"? No. Instead, he tells his servant, "Get dinner ready for me. After you serve me my dinner, you can eat yours." That's what a boss does, isn't it? He doesn't thank the servant for following orders. That's the way it is with you. When you've done everything you've ordered to do, say, "We're worthless servants. We've only done our duty." What's Jesus trying to teach you? The second mile. If you just do your duty. Some people say, "I go to church every Sunday. I give money in the offering plate. Therefore, God loves me." Jesus said, well, that's the basics. If you just do what you're told to, you're just a worthless servant. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to go that second mile. Don't just go to church. Be the church and go home and help your neighbor. And love your enemies. Take care of those who need Jesus. Find their needs and help them. You might not have a lot of money, but you can maybe sew up their clothes. There's always a way to go beyond what's necessary to help them. Imagine at school, you guys that go to school, can you imagine if you went to school starting tomorrow and you look for things to help the kids that were always picked on by the bullies, instead you help them? Or the nerds who nobody liked, you became their friend? Can you imagine the impact you'd have on your school by being nice? Just being nice. Stop calling them that name. That's not right. That's the second mile. Being willing to stand against the crowd and doing what's good. Here's the simple last thought of this. Love continues where obligation ends. Go beyond what you have to do, and you'll be like Jesus.